I'm Tom Landon. On today's program, we'll learn what it takes to provide safe homes for all citizens. Abraham Maslow famously coined the phrase hierarchy of needs, which says that before a person can become their highest self, they first need to be fed, housed, and warm. The history of public housing is marked with stories of forced relocation of minorities in subpar and unsafe, quote, housing projects, which is a term we're not going to use today, but a lot is changing when it comes to providing low-income housing. My guests today are here to talk about one local agency, the City of Roanoke Housing and Redevelopment Authority, and what it's doing to change both the facts and the perception of what public housing can be, and how we can provide safe, affordable housing for those living on the margins. David Bustamante is the Executive Director of the City of Roanoke Redevelopment and Housing Authority, and Rederick Gusler is the Director of Redevelopment and Revitalization. I've invited them here today both to dispel some myths about public housing and share some exciting plans for the future. Gentlemen, welcome to What It Takes.
Thank you.
I hesitated to use some of the words I used in that first thing. I know that calling things housing projects, some of those things have some connotations from the past that we try to avoid. But when you meet someone out in the public, David, and you are trying to explain what it is your agency does, where do you start?
We start by letting them know that what we do is that we provide affordable housing to those individuals that on their own would not be able to afford to be in a home with their families. So it's difficult because, as you said, that the word public housing in itself brings up some negative connotations, but there is a real need in this community right now for affordable housing. And what we are doing, and you'll hear later on in the show, I hope, is that our wait lists are full, and we're the housing of last resort. So people are coming to us in crowds looking for a place to live.
Right, and before I want to talk more about all of that, I like to start programs just by saying, how did you start doing what you're doing now? What got you to where you are now and professionally?
I was working at a one-stop center in Miami, Florida, and part of my job was to help individuals find work. By doing that, I had to work with the local housing authority in Miami, Florida, and as a result, I found out that when individuals look at somebody that's having a difficult time finding work, they don't really know what their living situation is. And most of the time, it's not as easy as saying, just go to work if you don't have a place to live. So I found myself dealing with the housing authority and trying to find stable housing for these families a lot throughout my time at the workforce. And from there, I was hired by the housing authority to work with them. And ever since then, I've been doing this for the last 20 years.
Great. And Rederick, how about you? How did you come to this kind of work?
My background is actually in urban planning. And so I got out of grad school at Virginia Tech, and I wanted to stay in the area because I have roots here. My parents grew up outside Salem in Roanoke County. And so I got the job that I really wanted at the time was with the City of Roanoke in the planning department, and I was there as a city planner for almost 15 years. And that's where I really got familiar with what the Roanoke Redevelopment and Housing Authority does. I was always interested in housing, did my graduate research on housing, and I worked with the Housing Authority as a city planner on a couple of different projects. And so from there, when I found out there was an opening at the Housing Authority in 2015, I came on board in the position I'm in now, and been there ever since.
You mentioned that you had studied urban planning. Mm-hmm. I mentioned in my opening remarks, sometimes urban planning, certainly urban planning pre-1980s has some pretty bad connotations in terms of what was often done to communities instead of for communities. You want to talk about that a little bit?
Well, I would start by saying there's a semantic aspect to the term planning and what the field has become. And now the field of urban planning is kind of defined by people that go into a degree in planning. At the time when some of the things I think you're getting to with urban renewal and a lot of these things were going on, The urban planning field was much different, and often what generically are referred to as planners in the past often were, and I'm not criticizing them, but engineers, who were making decisions that were design decisions about cities. A lot of urban renewal and the design of the interstate system, for instance, those were largely engineering decisions that didn't really calculate the social
Sure, let's
impact.
draw a straight line between
Yeah.
where we need to get this road
Yeah.
to, and they didn't worry about what was in between. In Roanoke, that meant
Right.
the destruction of Gainsborough and Diamond Hill and some of those other
so,
places.
and I'm not criticizing the engineering field has come a long ways since then too, and so the urban planning field now, so much of what happened in the past, I think that you're often taught that there was a kind of dark ages in American planning through that kind of post-depression, post-World War II into the 70s, and then planning began to get a bit more sophisticated in terms of what planners consider, and looking at cities in a much more comprehensive framework, as they do now. And I've seen that certainly through my career, and I think, at the same time, the housing field has changed and evolved to realize, well, you can't just create bricks and mortar and walk away from it. There's an awful lot more, and we do a lot more at the Housing Authority than
Sure.
just build houses.
And I want to talk about that stuff. And David, it occurs to me that like the field has changed, and I'm sure the housing field has changed. For like early days, it was like things that were done to communities, and then it was kind of like things that were done for communities, and hopefully we're getting into a place where we're doing things with communities. Does that resonate with you at all?
Most definitely. I mean, right now what we're trying to do is, since there's such a need and lack of affordable housing, is that we're working with the community to try to build more affordable housing. So we run into some difficulty at times with certain groups that don't want, when you say I'm coming in to build affordable housing, you get a lot of pushback.
Sure.
But they understand, or the majority of individuals that we have spoken with understand that this is a need, and there's always a way through communication to get this done. It needs to be done. There's just not enough housing for those individuals that need it.
Yeah, and when we talk about the need, and I don't expect you to be prepared with numbers or statistics in a large way, but where do we fit? I know your focus is Roanoke because that's where you work, but in this general area, the region, where are we in terms of how great is the need for housing and services that your organization provides?
I believe that the Roanoke Valley Allegheny Regional Commission did a survey, I think it was in 2019, and their estimate was that we were short 4,000 units. Today, in 2023, I believe that number has doubled. So there's a huge void in the need versus what's available out there.
And that doesn't just mean, people are homeless, right? Sometimes they're just not in optimal situations.
They're rent burden, or they're paying over 40% of their income towards their rent, or they're living with a family member, or they're living from couch to couch. So yeah.
Yeah, and I want to clarify, in our field, we're dealing with the largely the extremely poor, extremely low income. The study that the regional commission did that David referred to, was a regional study, and it identified housing needs across the board. And I think that's what he was getting at, was that those numbers are high. There's different projections that have been done recently about how many units are needed to meet demand, period. But also it was market rate housing that's needed that actually impacts what we do. It impacts where people can use a Section 8 housing choice voucher, for instance. And it impacts the market, from top to bottom when people have the funds, have the income to buy at a higher level, but the housing isn't there, the inventory is not there, so they're then buying at a lower level, and some of those units maybe could have been, rented to someone in the low to moderate income bracket. So we have a regional need. It's across the country too at this point.
Oh, well, sure. I mean, you read about some of
Yeah.
the worst case scenarios out west in San Francisco and places like New York, but but I hear you there, and especially as the economy develops and people move into neighborhoods that maybe, we hear the word gentrification, right, where this neighborhood used to be a place where lower income people could live. Now they don't have that place to live, right?
Yeah, and since you brought up gentrification, we don't see that the problem with gentrification usually is displacement.
Right.
We haven't seen that much, if at all, in Roanoke per se. I don't want to, now maybe there is and I'm not aware of it, but what we have seen recently, and back to the affordable housing needs, I mean, we have over 4,300 people or so in our housing choice voucher wait list, 4,300 plus people, and we've seen properties that have been bought that were affordable, they were eligible to be housing choice voucher or Section 8 rentals, that the new owners have increased the rent and made them unaffordable. But it's not what you would call gentrification happening there. If you see the places we're talking about, some of them it's surprising just that some properties have been the transactions happened and they've raised the rent, and it's, they're not necessarily high rent places. They're just out of the range for our clients. And so it's making it much more difficult for the clients that we serve to find places to live.
And I do want to talk about like some of the services and things that are also provided and partnerships you have with places like Virginia Western and others. Tell me about the properties that we think of in Roanoke as public housing facilities. For people who aren't familiar with them, what are we looking at in terms of if someone is going to live in an organization that's managed by your organization?
The most important thing is that they need to be extremely low income. They apply online.
What do we mean by extremely low income?
Below 30% AMI, or
Average
median income.
Okay.
Yeah. So they have to be extremely low income. They apply on site. We call them in for an interview. We check their background. We make sure that they have they proof of their income. And if the minimum rent in public housing is $50, so they have to at least be able to pay $50 a month.
Right.
And then everything else is 30% of their income.
Okay, so you set a cap at 30% of their income.
Right.
We always hear when we're young people and getting financial advice, if we're lucky, somebody says, your rent should be 25% or 30% of your income. So that's a nice ballpark number to go with, right? How many, again, I want to make sure I'm using the right words here, but how many neighborhoods or facilities do you all manage where it's, people are living, with others all in that community? I'm thinking of places like Hurt Park and some of the other.
We have 8 developments.
Okay.
And roughly 1,280 units.
I think you were saying the word development. I'm going to use
and-
it.
Yeah, that's what we typically say.
Okay, and I did spend the last couple days just in preparation for this interview. I like to kind of know a little bit, and I spent some time driving through all 8 of those and just getting out and looking around and getting a sense for them. And what I noticed, and you can tell me if I'm right or wrong, like it's clear that that your organization has been for many years working to improve some of these places. I'm thinking like the villages at Lincoln Terrace, right? Which I remember what they used to be, and when I drove through them the other day, wow, what a big difference that is. And then some that still look a little bit more like the traditional development. I'm thinking about, is it Lansdowne off Santa?
Yeah.
So how are we working to bring some of these kind of legacy developments into the modern age?
The Department of Housing and Urban Development has a new program out, which is called the Rental Assistance Demonstration Program, which basically means that you're allowed to change the Section 9, which is public housing, into the Section 8 platform. And by doing that, the actual property is then privatized. Okay. And the developers come in and they change those units and make those units into RAD units, or the Section 8 platform. Okay. And that way you're allowed then to go in there and change those units and remodel those units and make them as aesthetic as possible, clean them up. The problem with that is that once you do that, the housing authority is no longer responsible for that property. So it becomes privatized. And that has been I would say the choice of many housing providers, is to their properties were so dilapidated that they had to go this route. We are thinking about doing that to some of the properties. For example, Lansdowne, maybe Herb Park, Hump Manor. But we really, given the need that we have right now, developing new units is where we need to go first.
But, and let me add to that, I know what you mean, the privatized part would be financing. Right. With public housing, you cannot leverage you can't use as collateral for a loan, for instance, a private sector loan. The rental assistance demonstration allows you to seek private financing. HUD releases what's the declaration of trust over the property, but it's a public-private partnership. We would still be the manager of the property and involved as part owner. I think what David's referring to is mainly the privatization of the financing, and that it's out of the public housing program. And in our world, the public housing program and the housing choice voucher program, those are very different things. To the public, if they see something that's low-income housing, they often refer to it. Hurt Park, for instance, was a public housing development. It no longer is.
Okay.
Many people in the public may still assume so because we manage it and we're part owner. But it was financed through low-income housing tax credits and is no longer a public housing property. It has fewer units than it used to. Looks much better.
Yes, porches.
It's a much different neighborhood now. And I was involved at that time on the city side of that, and I saw the difference. I remember going to those meetings. There was no love lost amongst residents there for the buildings there. There was no attachment to them. But anyway, I just wanted to clarify that in terms of the public-private aspect of.
And that's my whole goal here, is to try to demystify some of this so people understand the difference between a Section 8 voucher and Section 9, right. The housing. One of the things I noticed across the street from Lansdowne is there's a public garden there and the Envision Center. And can we talk about that a little bit? Just tell me what it is and how that's designed to improve the lives of the people over there.
The Envision Center is a location where we have multiple partners within the building. We have Virginia Western, we have Family Services, we have Humankind. And the goal is to have somebody walk in and remove any kind of barriers to employment, whether it's education, whatever they may need in order to get themselves back on track and become self-sufficient, then they could find it in that one location. And then the garden, we've been getting individuals from our communities to come in there and help, grow the garden, and then, the fruits that come out of the garden, we give them back to the community. So it's been a very, very nice place for the community to have.
It's nice just to be able to have a garden where you live, right? And to be able to have that fresh food. I know there are some things that you look for in a good location. And I want to talk, when we're on the subject of food, like that the ability for people to walk to things like grocery stores, to other neighborhood centers. Often I think the perception is that developments like the ones that you manage are sort of off on their own, and that the people there, they might not have access to some of the other amenities. What constitutes a good location when you're talking about where you're going to locate a development? Maybe Frederick, that's a good question for you.
I would start with what you're kind of getting at, and I think, is that there's there are so many developments, around the country. Our city is no exception, where public housing and low-income housing was created because we'll put this over there, that's out of the way. It was the path of least resistance at the time, and it was the affordable land. We still have that issue. We would love to buy property and move people into census tracts where we can deconcentrate poverty. For years, Housing and Urban Development has had that as a goal. City of Roanoke, we talked about that in our planning. We've talked about that. We would love to get people into mixed income areas where you don't isolate everyone that's low income in one spot. We have a long ways to go out of that because where our properties were built. So around, some of these areas, and Lansdowne's a great example, there's a lot that is happening. We were able, thanks to the city, when they decided to put the Melrose Library, renovate the space in the Goodwill and move it over there, and it's a great facility. And then Kiwanis, on the heels of that, they did a playground right there by the library. That allowed us to get the former library from the city and create the Envision Center, which is a place where we offer services and partner with other agencies, as David said. So we're trying to, and then with the garden there's also a garden down on the Goodwill property. Everybody is trying to work with what's going on there, and then there's the Melrose Plaza project that the Goodwill is working on with the city, to try to bring in a grocery store and a fitness center there in the Goodwill's current space. So I think the answer to is like, well, if we can't get the ideal properties to develop, that we try to work with what we have and making the area around them, as accommodating for residents to be able to advance themselves and get other services.
Sure. We have with 5 minutes or so left, plenty of time. But I wanted to talk, one of the things I noticed on your website and I noticed in conversation, there's a couple properties in Roanoke that are currently not developed. They don't have anything on them, some used to. One is the property, I think it's Shenandoah and Peters Creek, and the other is kind of by the Gainsborough Y, and I understand that you all have some interest in developing those, and I don't know where you are in that process, but maybe we can talk about that a little bit.
We just purchased the land, what used to be called the Spanish Terrace, right?
Right.
Yeah. And what we plan to do there is build 86 units at some point, possibly more. I mean, there were roughly 200 units there before. So, but financially, we could afford now 86 units, and
Right.
we're looking to do something to that effect, probably starting in 24, applying for low-income tax credits, and then hopefully start to build later 24, early 25.
Because that's really a beautiful piece of property.
It is.
And it's right across the street from a grocery store. There's buses go by.
And it's flat land.
Yeah, at the top of it, right? And that's great. And then the other one, I guess, is I've always referred to it as kind of kudzu bluffs there behind the Gainsborough Y. Is anything happening there?
Well, I would say back to the HUD, in new developments, if you're going through a HUD program, they have a fair housing and equal opportunity review first of your site, and they actually look at the minority concentration and the poverty rate. So we've been in the census tract that property's in Gainsborough. Several years ago, we were denied an application just to do a duplex over by Lincoln because of the high poverty rate and high minority concentration. So that property doesn't fit any of our programs going through HUD, so we're basically looking for a developer to come in, either partner with or allow a developer to do some affordable housing there, because that property is still in what's the Gainsborough redevelopment plan back from the old days of urban renewal. It's not been worked on in years, but I think we're approaching at a time where there's a need for housing, and we would love to get some closure on that and create something there to be valuable for the neighborhood.
It's so close to downtown. It would seem like a good spot. What are you kind of proudest of in terms of what your agency does here in Roanoke?
The ability to provide individuals with homes, and not only homes, but also provide them with the ability to become self-sufficient. We have a lot of individuals that come in and they really want to do something. I mean, they're down and out. It takes a lot to walk into our building and say,
Sure.
I need a place to live. I can't afford a place to live. So we take that and we find them a place to live, but we don't stop there. We empower them to look for a place to work, to either go to school, pick up a trade, anything that we could do to help them become self-sufficient. We try our best to get them to that point.
So your job's not done just because someone has a place to live.
And I say that all the time. Our job isn't done when we give them the keys. That's when our job begins.
Right. Frederick, if you could wave a magic wand to make the work that you do easier, what would it?
A magic wand. Well, I kind of on the real estate side of it. So I would love to just have properties that are in a census tract where we could combine and just do, a combination of market rate housing, affordable housing, affordable housing for people that are, close to being up at the, the higher end of that, and then housing also for the the extremely poor. I would like to see that all happen in some way, shape, or form, and we'll keep working on that. I don't see the magic wand coming anytime
Well,
soon.
magic wands often involve a lot of elbow grease, and surprisingly and sadly, that it's all the time we have. There's no way to get into a subject this deep in 26 minutes, but I'm glad that you guys came here and started the conversation. And as we close the program, I want to thank my guests, encourage those interested in their work to visit their website at rkehousing.org to learn more. For What It Takes, I'm Tom Landon.